Imagine a building, not a museum, not an archive. Something far more extraordinary than either of those things. A building that contained, in one place, the collected knowledge of the entire ancient world. Every scroll, every manuscript, every piece of writing that human civilization had produced up to that point. Mathematics that would not be rediscovered for 1,000 years. Medical knowledge that modern science is still catching up to. Philosophy, astronomy, engineering, history. The complete record of who we were and what we knew. Now imagine that building is gone, destroyed, and that nobody can agree on who destroyed it, when, or why. That is the story of the Library of Alexandria. And the mystery at the center of it, the question of who really burned it and what they were trying to hide, tells us something about power, knowledge, and control that is as relevant today as it was 2,000 years ago. Before we talk about how the library was destroyed, we need to understand what it actually was, because most people have a vague sense that it was important, but they don't understand just how extraordinary it truly was. What existed in Alexandria was not just impressive for its time. It was something that had never existed before and has arguably never existed since. The Library of Alexandria was founded around 300 BC by Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's generals who had taken control of Egypt after Alexander's death. Ptolemy had a vision. He wanted to collect every piece of written knowledge in the world in one place, not copies, originals, or the best copies he could find. He sent agents across the known world, to Greece, to Persia, to India, to Babylon. They bought scrolls, borrowed scrolls, sometimes simply confiscated scrolls from ships arriving in Alexandria's harbor. Every ship that docked was searched. If it contained books, they were taken, copied, and the copies returned, the originals kept for the library. At its peak, historians estimate the library contained between 400,000 and 700,000 scrolls. To put that in context, the next largest library in the ancient world had perhaps 20,000. This was not a library. It was the brain of human civilization. And alongside it was the Museion, the world's first research institution. A place where scholars from across the world were invited to come and live, think, and work, paid for by the Egyptian state. Euclid developed the foundations of geometry here. Eratosthenes calculated the circumference of the Earth here, and was accurate to within 1%. Archimedes studied here. Herophilos performed the first systematic human dissections here and mapped the nervous system. This was not the ancient world stumbling in the dark. This was civilization at its most luminous. And now we arrive at the mystery. Because the Library of Alexandria did not simply fade away or fall into disrepair. It was destroyed. But here is the problem. Nobody agrees on who destroyed it, or when, or even how many times it was damaged before the final destruction. There are three main suspects, three moments in history when the library is believed to have suffered catastrophic damage. And each of them, when you examine them closely, raises more questions than it answers. The first suspect is Julius Caesar. In 48 BC, Caesar was in Alexandria fighting a civil war on behalf of Cleopatra against her brother. He ordered his ships in the harbor to be set on fire to prevent them falling into enemy hands. The fire spread to the docks. Ancient sources, including the Roman writer Seneca, claim that 40,000 scrolls stored in a warehouse near the harbor were destroyed. Caesar never mentioned this in his own account of the war. He simply left it out. A Roman general destroyed the greatest repository of human knowledge in history and did not think it worth recording. The second suspect is the Christian bishop Theophilus. In 391 AD, the Roman Emperor Theodosius issued an edict ordering the destruction of all pagan temples throughout the empire. Theophilus, the Archbishop of Alexandria, used this as justification to destroy the Serapeum, a temple complex that housed a secondary collection of the library's scrolls. Ancient sources describe mobs destroying everything inside. How many scrolls survived to this point and how many were lost remains unknown. The third suspect is the Arab general Amr ibn al-As, who conquered Alexandria in 641 AD. A story, first recorded 500 years after the event, claims that Amr asked the Caliph Omar what to do with the library. Omar allegedly replied, "If the books agree with the Quran, they are unnecessary. If they disagree, they are dangerous. Either way, burn them." This story is almost certainly fabricated, but it was repeated for centuries as historical fact, and it has shaped the narrative in ways that serve a very particular political purpose. Let us go deeper into each of these moments. Because the closer you look, the more uncomfortable the truth becomes. Julius Caesar, the man who is blamed by many historians for the first catastrophic damage to the library. What do we actually know? We know Caesar was in Alexandria. We know he set fire to ships. We know Seneca, writing around 100 years later, claims 40,000 scrolls were burned in the resulting fire. But here is what is strange. Caesar wrote his own account of the Alexandrian War. It is detailed. It covers the military engagements, the political negotiations, the geography of the city. And the library, nor any books, are not mentioned once, not once. A man who prided himself on his literary culture, who was himself a celebrated author, who would have understood exactly what the library represented, wrote nothing about its destruction. There are two possible explanations for this silence. Either the damage was less severe than later accounts suggest, perhaps a warehouse of scrolls near the harbor, not the library itself, or Caesar knew exactly what had happened and chose not to record it because the destruction of the greatest library in the world was not something even the most powerful man in Rome could comfortably put his name to. The philosopher Seneca, who recorded the 40,000 figure, was not a historian. He was making a philosophical point about the vanity of collecting books. He may have exaggerated. He may have been accurately reporting a rumor. We do not know. And that uncertainty, that deliberate or accidental fog around what Caesar did or did not destroy, is itself revealing the second moment. 391 AD. The Roman Empire is now officially Christian. The Emperor Theodosius has declared Christianity the only legal religion of the empire. Every other form of worship, every tradition, every philosophy, every spiritual practice that existed before Christianity's rise has been declared heresy. Pagan temples are to be closed. Pagan texts are dangerous. In Alexandria, the Archbishop Theophilus leads a Christian mob to the Serapeum, the great temple of the god Serapis, which housed a significant collection of books from the library. What happened next is described in ancient sources as a systematic destruction. The statues were smashed. The sacred objects were melted down. The books, however many remained, were destroyed or scattered. And here is the philosophical point that history tends to skip over. The early Christian church had a complex and often hostile relationship with classical knowledge. Not all of it. Some Christian scholars actively preserved and translated ancient texts. But there was a powerful strand within early Christianity that saw the accumulated wisdom of the Greek and Roman world as a threat, as competition, as the devil's knowledge. Tertullian, one of the early church fathers, asked, "What has Athens to do with Jerusalem? What has the academy to do with the church?" His answer was nothing. The wisdom of the ancient world and its philosophy, its science, its questioning of authority was seen by this strand of Christianity not as something to be treasured, but as something to be overcome. And so, when the Serapeum burned, Whatever it contained burned with it. We do not know exactly what was lost because by definition the records of what was there were among the things that disappeared. The destruction of the Serapeum did not end the violence in Alexandria. 24 years later, in 415 AD, it produced its most human and most haunting consequence. Hypatia of Alexandria was a mathematician, astronomer, and philosopher. She was the head of the Neoplatonist school in Alexandria, one of the most respected intellectuals in the ancient world. She wrote commentaries on mathematics and astronomy. She built scientific instruments. Students came from across the Mediterranean to learn from her. She was, by any measure, one of the greatest minds of her age. She was also a woman, and she was not Christian. And in 415 AD, a Christian mob, allegedly incited by the new Archbishop Cyril, dragged her from her chariot in the streets of Alexandria, stripped her, and murdered her. They scraped the flesh from her bones with pottery shards. They burned what remained. Hypatia is remembered today as a symbol of the death of classical knowledge, of the moment when the questioning philosophical tradition of the ancient world was physically overwhelmed by a religious authority that feared what that tradition represented. Her death marked what many historians consider the effective end of the great Alexandrian intellectual tradition. The library, whatever remained of it, did not long survive her, and now, the most politically charged part of this story. The Arab conquest of Alexandria in 641 AD, and the story of Caliph Omar ordering the library burned. This story, Omar saying, "Burn the books. If they agree with the Quran, they are unnecessary. If they disagree, they are dangerous," has been repeated in history books for centuries. It was used during the Crusades to paint Muslims as the destroyers of classical civilization. It was used during European colonialism to justify the idea that the Islamic world was hostile to knowledge and progress. It is still repeated today. There is one significant problem. The story first appears in writing in the work of a Christian bishop named Bar Hebraeus, writing 500 years after the alleged event. No earlier source mentions it, not one. The Arab historians who wrote extensively about the conquest of Alexandria, and they wrote a great deal, do not mention it. The story appears out of nowhere 5 centuries later, written by someone with an obvious motivation to paint the Arab conquest in the worst possible light. Furthermore, and this is critical, by 641 AD, the library as a functioning institution had almost certainly already been destroyed. The damage from Caesar's fire, the destruction of the Serapeum, and decades of political instability had reduced whatever remained to a shadow of what it once was. There may have been nothing significant left to burn. The Arab world of the 7th and 8th century was not hostile to classical knowledge. It was the opposite. The Abbasid Caliphate, the same civilization that Ibn Khaldun wrote about, launched the greatest translation movement in human history. Arabic scholars translated and preserved the works of Aristotle, Plato, Euclid, Archimedes, and Galen. Works that would otherwise have been completely lost to the world. Works that were only returned to Europe centuries later through Arabic translations. The European Renaissance, which is celebrated as the rebirth of classical learning, was built substantially on knowledge that Arab scholars had saved, translated, and expanded while Europe was burning books. Let us talk about what we know was lost, because this is perhaps the most staggering part of the entire story. We know certain things existed in the ancient world, because later writers refer to them, that we have never recovered, that simply do not exist anywhere in the world today. Aristotle wrote approximately 200 works. We have 31. The rest are gone. What was in those 169 missing works? We do not know. We know he wrote about comedy. His work on comedy is referenced in other ancient texts. It has never been found. We know he wrote about poetry, about natural philosophy, about political systems. Gone. The works of Democritus, the philosopher who first proposed that all matter is made of atoms, 2,000 years before modern physics confirmed it, wrote approximately 70 books. Not one has survived. We know what he thought only because other writers quoted him. What else did he know? What else did he work out? We will never know. There were works by Eratosthenes, the man who calculated the circumference of the Earth, on geography and astronomy that went far beyond what we have recovered. There were medical texts from Herophilos on human anatomy that described the nervous system in ways that would not be rediscovered until the 16th century. There were engineering texts, navigation texts, mathematical texts that modern scholars believe may have contained knowledge we consider relatively recent. Think about what that means. The history of human intellectual progress is not a straight line moving forward. It is a jagged, interrupted journey in which knowledge was won, lost, and had to be won again. We may have spent 1,000 years rediscovering things that were already known, things that burned in a warehouse in Alexandria, or were scraped from shelves by a mob in 391 AD, or simply rotted away in the damp after the institution that housed them collapsed. And now the philosophical question that the Library of Alexandria forces us to ask. Not just who burned it, but why does knowledge get destroyed in the first place? What is it about certain kinds of knowledge that makes the powerful so afraid of it? The philosopher Francis Bacon wrote in 1620 that knowledge is power. He meant it as a positive statement, that understanding the world gives us the ability to improve it. But power understood Bacon's equation from the other direction long before Bacon wrote it. If knowledge is power, then controlling knowledge is controlling power, and destroying knowledge is destroying a threat. Julius Caesar did not set fire to books because he hated books. He set fire to ships for military reasons, and books burned as a consequence. But his silence about what was lost tells us something about how even the most educated and literary of powerful men valued military and political advantage over the preservation of human knowledge. The church did not destroy pagan texts purely out of fanaticism. They destroyed them because those texts represented an alternative way of understanding the world, a way that did not require the church as an intermediary, a way that asked questions the church could not afford to have asked. Plato's Republic imagined forms of governance that had nothing to do with divine authority. Epicurus argued that the gods were indifferent to human affairs and that the path to happiness lay in reason and friendship rather than prayer and sacrifice. These were not just competing ideas. They were existential threats to institutional power. And the fabricated story of Omar burning the library, invented 500 years after the event and repeated for 1,000 years since, tells us something equally important. That the destruction of the library was such a powerful symbol of the loss of knowledge, that those who wanted to shape the narrative of history were willing to assign blame to their enemies rather than examine the truth. The library became a weapon in subsequent wars, a story deployed to paint the other side as the enemy of civilization. Here is the thought that should keep you awake at night. The burning of the Library of Alexandria was not a unique event. It was not an aberration. It was, and remains, standard practice. In 1258, when the Mongols sacked Baghdad, they threw the books of the House of Wisdom into the Tigris River. Witnesses said the river ran black with ink for days. Centuries of Islamic scholarship, mathematics, medicine, astronomy, philosophy, sank to the bottom of the Tigris. In 1562, a Spanish bishop named Diego de Landa burned virtually every Maya book in existence in a single afternoon in Mexico. He burned them because they contained what he called superstition and the devil's lies. Of the thousands of Maya codices that existed, 4 survive. 4, an entire civilization's written record, gone in an afternoon. The Nazis burned books. The Soviet Union destroyed or buried archives. Colonial powers across Africa and Asia systematically destroyed or ignored indigenous written records, and then used the absence of those records as evidence that those peoples had no history worth preserving. And today, the burning is quieter. It does not always involve fire. It involves algorithms deciding what you see. It involves academic institutions deciding what counts as legitimate knowledge. It involves publishing houses, media companies, and governments deciding what narrative gets amplified and what gets buried. The library burns in different ways, but it burns. In 2002, archaeologists excavating beneath the streets of Alexandria found something remarkable. 13 lecture halls, stone benches arranged in a semicircle, exactly the layout described in ancient texts for the Maoxiang. The great research institution attached to the library, they had found it. Or rather, they had found what was left of it. Empty rooms, stone benches, no books. The knowledge is gone. We will never know exactly what was in those scrolls. We will never know what Aristotle wrote in his 169 missing works. We will never know what the Maya recorded in their thousands of burned codices. We will never know what the scholars of the House of Wisdom discovered in the centuries of work that sank into the Tigris. What we do know, what the Library of Alexandria teaches us above all else, is that knowledge is fragile, that it requires institutions to protect it, cultures that value it, and people willing to fight for it. That the most dangerous enemy of human progress is not ignorance. It is the powerful who prefer that others remain ignorant. The library burned, more than once, by more than one hand, for more than one reason. But the common thread running through every act of destruction, Caesar's silence, Theophilus's mob, the fabricated story of Omar, the bishop burning Maya books in an afternoon, is the same. Knowledge threatened someone, and someone decided that was not acceptable. The question the Library of Alexandria leaves us with is not who burned it. The question is, what are they burning today? And are we paying attention? Empires of thought. This is only the beginning. Yo.